Welcome to this session on the wider sustainability picture, updates from our climate partners. Before we hear from our speakers, I'll just introduce what the WCA Climate Partnership Programme is and what it involves. As part of our ongoing climate and environment initiatives and our commitment to providing value-added services for our members, we formed ongoing climate partnerships with organisations such as NGOs, think tanks and events providers, a programme which we launched in early 2021. We hope that this partnership will allow knowledge sharing, giving the cement industry a voice and platform outside of our traditional silos, as well as fostering new partnerships, collaborations and ideas between our industry, other hard-to-abate sectors and the wider climate movement. Today, I'm joined by three fantastic speakers. Firstly, Alex Cameron, founder and CEO of Decarb Connect, an organisation which works to support those driving decarbonisation in the most energy-intensive sectors, brokering access to hard-to-reach information and facilitating network relationships to accelerate decarbonisation. Secondly, we have Greg Katz, founder and CEO of the Smart Surfaces Coalition based in America, which promotes the uptake of greener and smarter surfaces in urban areas, which allows cities to save billions of dollars, create jobs, decrease heat in built-up areas, among other several benefits. And thirdly, we have Jenny Chu, Head of Energy Initiatives at the Climate Group, an international not-for-profit organisation that works with businesses and government leaders around the world to address climate change. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our speakers.
Hi, my name is Alex Cameron and I'm the CEO of Decarb Connect. We at Decarb Connect are very pleased to be one of the World Cement Association's climate partners. Our relationship started when we first approached the WCA to speak at our Industrial Decarbonisation Festival earlier this year. And since then, I've been really pleased to work with Ian Riley and Manon Burbage on a number of different projects, including our upcoming North American event and a cement-specific webinar that we're running in July. So today I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you a bit about what we are seeing and hearing from the different media products that we develop in this space. So just as a little bit of background, Decarb Connect formed at the start of 2020, and we are not cement or concrete specific, but we are rooted in the hard to abate sectors. So everything we do, our reports, our private members network, our events, our webinars, all of that is geared to supporting the hard-to-abate sectors as they start to accelerate in decarbonisation. And clearly, cement and concrete are not only a part of that, but also often the industry that has the most to say, has the most live projects and has the most experience of having stepped forward with decarbonisation. So let me tell you a little bit about, yes, why are we operating in this space? The team comes from a variety of backgrounds, but all of us have worked in industries such as energy, fertilizers, and similar, i.e. still very energy intensive processes. All of us have a deep interest in contributing our skills and interest to the climate change issue, but we're also, commercial and business focused as a group. So for us, it was quite important to marry both those climate objectives with something that was useful to business and really sort of helped steer companies with the biggest challenge in the right direction. So the industries that we work with are cement, metals such as steel and aluminium, glass, ceramics, refining, chemicals, paper, oil and gas, all of those obviously quite different in their output, but similar in their focus on, or their reliance rather, on energy intensive processes such as high industrial heat or chemical processes. So yes, a lot of similarities, although clearly some differences in the actual end use materials that they create. The partnership that we formed with WCA, I think we hope is a mutually beneficial one for the WCA. It helps them take the voice of the cement sector out into a kind of broader discussion of climate, and also helps us have a deeper connection into one of our most key sectors. So there's some good give and take there, and we hope that we're offering some good benefits to World Cement Association members, as well as getting a lot of benefit from understanding more and more about the cement specific challenges around decarbonisation. We also quite bluntly think that collaborations, whether it's quite small ones like ours at the moment, or whether they're the big industry collaborations, I think these are really going to be what defines anyone's ability to move forward with decarbonisation. So many complex issues to tackle that having kind of more deliberate connections with people who are geared towards the same challenge, but with a different perspective, and connections into alternate networks, absolutely essential. So we think the partnership also reflects that. So across our platform, as I've mentioned, we run events, of course, and create high-level events that really dig into decarbonisation of the hard-to-abate sectors. We also have our podcast, 33 episodes and counting, and a private members network, which is called Decarbonisation Leaders Network, and a growing reports business, of which the survey that we did into industrial decarbonisation has been the main piece of work so far. So perhaps it'd be useful if we sort of talk a bit about what are we hearing. So the podcast is an interesting exercise. I think when I started, I thought, we'll do 6 episodes and have a voice of each sector and we'll just leave it there. Actually, what happened is it's really taken off. I think because it's quite a niche offering, we're one of the few podcasts to focus on industrial decarbonisation, and within that, very specifically, the hard to abate sectors. We've been really successful in building an audience that just has a general interest in how do we make this work? How do we get this moving? So in those 33 episodes, we've talked to people like the Chief of Staff at BP, CTO and co-founder of Semvita, which is a great sort of disruptor tech operating out of Houston. We've spoken to the World Steel Association. Your own Ian Riley has been a really important voice on that as well. So a real variety of voices, along with some leading investors in this space. So what has come out of it? What's been inspiring? Well, for me, I would say it's been really interesting, I suppose, to challenge head on this view that often exists in the outside world that somehow the hard to abate sectors are not trying or are not engaging or are not dealing with the issue of carbon. And if nothing else, the podcast really knocks that on the head and says, well, they are. These are the challenges. And through the variety of voices we've had, we've also explored some really interesting case studies, such as the Norcem project in Norway and many others, that really sort of show how we can make these incremental steps forward. I think the other thing that's been interesting about it is the difference in perspective. So often our investor sessions have a slightly different lens on the issue. We've had one impact investor, Regnan, who talked about their report into the sustainability of hydrogen, which is obviously an interesting angle on something that could well be a key pillar in decarbonising industry. We've also had people talk about how effective ESG funds and investments really are in driving the climate change issue that they are designed to deal with. So a variety of voices, and some of my favorites, I have to say, are from the disruptors. So whether it's the Smart Materials Centre in Australia or the recent podcast with Semvita, I think often it's the disruptors that just bring a really fresh perspective into how we can tackle some of the challenges faced by our industry. So what else? From the Leaders Network, Decarbonisation Leaders Network that we run, we've been very lucky to have a Founders Council that's been very proactive, including people from Lafarge Holcim, including people from Carmeuse, obviously a lime producer that works closely with the cement sector, as well as other sectors, so other kind of steel, glass, energy, and other groups as well are involved in that. I think, if I'm honest, when I started that, I thought the main value would be the variety of content that we would create that's solely for members. Actually, what we hear time and time again is that it is this cross-sector nature of the group, and the fact that people can use not only our group meetings, but also offline discussions to sort of bolster their strategy and strategic planning, who can sort of test out different ideas with each other. I think it's really been that has been the main value to the members so far. So we have nearly, I think, 90 members signed up to that now from a range of these hard to abate sectors. The other thing that we hear is that whilst the group itself is designed to be a closed-door network only for industry, we do take care to bring guests, often from disruptors, tech or advisory groups, into our monthly meetings. And often those kind of discussions and Q&As have also been incredibly useful to people. So yeah, a lot of gains so far from both the podcast and that network. And I suppose our next step, particularly with the network, is to really see what we can do to foster some more specific collaborations within the group. One other piece of work that I thought I'd mention that you can access through our website or contact me directly about is our Decarbonisation Survey. We ran this at the end of last year and it was really interesting. I mean, there were some things that you would totally expect to have heard, like, yes, COVID did have an impact. But what was interesting was it the impact that people might expect? Often we heard through that survey that while some projects are being put on hold, that actually in the round, the impact of COVID on industry had almost been to accelerate the focus on decarbonisation, to shift it up a gear, perhaps the recognition of the impact of one kind of crisis, opening up some thoughts and discussions in many companies about the need to tackle another impending crisis. But some of the key questions I thought I'd tell you about, and I just have the stats on my screen in front of me, are where some of the drivers for decarbonisation were coming from. So I assumed when we did the survey that probably the main driver would be from regulatory or legislative pressures. Actually, just 13% of people that responded thought that that was the number one driver for their corporate activities in decarbonisation at the moment. The number one kind of aspect is just under 30% of respondents were people saying that they actually think there are real commercial opportunities from decarbonisation, which was interesting. About 33%, so actually this was the biggest group, apologies, 33% were saying actually it's been generated internally. So whether that was because they had, which I know this came up in one company, a sort of a growing intake of young engineers bringing more of a kind of environmental focus to their work and really pushing for this activity internally, or sometimes obviously it gets driven from the board and from the C-suite as well. But that internal generation of activity was interesting to me. It wasn't just that people were sitting back and waiting to see what regulators or lawmakers might require of them. Another interesting point was, where does this fall? Where does the issue of decarbonisation fall as a priority for hard to abate sectors? About 40% of our respondents said that it was their top priority at the moment. And bear in mind, these were not necessarily people who are only tasked with decarbonisation. We had a lot of responses from strategy, C-suite, so generalised leadership titles as much as anything else. About a third of the group said that whilst they couldn't say if it was in their top three, which I think is how we'd phrase the question, they said it was rapidly rising up the agenda. So again, it was kind of interesting to hear that, because when you're outside of hard to abate sectors, often the kind of generally received wisdom is that it's not a priority, that people aren't focused on this. So the survey was really just reinforcing the fact that that's not the case. People have this clearly in their sights. It's just a case of what do we do about it? The final thing, there are a number of points of data that I could pull out of that report, but one of the things that I thought was interesting was in one of the free text questions we asked about what is needed, the most often cited thing was collaboration. So people were saying what we need is more collaborations to open up, more effective collaboration, whether that's international, so between countries or between industries. A number of people sort of referenced the need to share risk and also a willingness and understanding that there would therefore be a necessity to share the rewards, and that really forming effective collaborations will be key to rolling out many of the most critical technologies at scale. So you can imagine that was interesting to us, because obviously we sit with this group at the heart of our business who are a cross-sector network. So we're very hopeful that we can help facilitate collaborations that can do just that, share the risk, but share the reward of this very complex work. So that's a little bit of an overview of what we've been hearing through our various activities. If you have an interest in learning more about Decarb Connect, you can find us on the Climate Partners page of the WCA website, or you can come direct to decarbconnect.com. We have an upcoming North American event. So if that's a region where you have operations or where you're based, do get in touch and take a look at the discussions and the speakers that are going to be really digging into decarbonisation issues across North America. We'll also be hosting on July 1st a cement-specific webinar. This is with our sponsor, SIBO. So we'll be looking at how AI technology can help manage the kind of inefficiencies of process that often directly lead to carbon dioxide emissions. So it's kind of an interesting lens on the decarbonisation issue. If you're interested in the survey that we've already done, you can find that on our website or approach me. And we hope you will get in touch with us, because we are cross-sector and we need the input of many, many groups in the hard-to-abate sector. And very certainly we need cement and concrete to be, a key part of our focus. So I hope that I will get to meet you soon, and I will be hosting a roundtable. If you'd like to hear more about what we hear from our network and also some of the results of the survey, then please come along and ask me your questions. Many thanks.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting us to participate. I'm going to talk today about a coalition called the Smart Surfaces Coalition, made up of 45 organizations, including the World Cement Association, the National League of Cities, the American Public Health Association, American Planning Association, Habitat for Humanity. And the objective is to become more conscious about our design decisions. The way that cities make design decisions is it goes to their Department of Transportation, and the Department of Transportation does whatever is lowest first cost. That means dark and impervious surfaces. And as a result, this is what cities look like. They're dark, which means they absorb almost all the sunlight, which heats up the city. And they're impervious, which means water runs off and you get flooding and mold. What we want cities to look like is to be much more reflective, which bounce light and heat back into space. We want it to be greener to absorb water and clean the air. And we want it to be porous to allow groundwater recharge, and to avoid water pooling and to avoid flooding and the resulting mold. And by the way, the difference between the first city and the second city is about 9 degrees on average peak summer temperature. This green version is going to be much cooler, better air quality, and less smog. So how does the coalition address this? We build this broad coalition of organizations, and we frame smart surfaces as a conscious choice. And we say, look, how you manage sun and rain matters to the quality of life in cities. We're going to frame these as smart surface. Second is build the cost benefit analytic engine and other tools to allow detailed understanding of scenarios. What if our city adopts more trees? What are the benefits and costs? What if we go to more reflective surfaces? What are the benefits and costs? And then finally, we work directly with cities. We're working currently in Stockton, California, and in Baltimore. We're looking at beginning work in Nairobi, Brazil, UK, to support cities to make informed and better decisions about their surfaces. So smart surfaces include reflective, green, porous, solar PV, trees, and then integrated solutions. The implication of adopting these is that it changes the temperature profile in a city a lot. We've all had the experience of walking on a dark surface. It feels much hotter. Moderate adoption of smart surfaces in Baltimore can cool that city by between 3 and 4 degrees. More aggressive scenarios in terms of adopting smart and reflective surfaces can cool a city by 6 or 8 degrees. And that's an important option for cities as they face the reality of climate change. One of the attributes of heat is that it's inversely correlated to income. So as one example, you see at this mapping of Washington, D.C., where I live, very strong inverse correlation between temperature and income. And what that is really saying is that low-income areas have much fewer trees, they have darker surfaces, they're less porous. And so that structural inequality results in huge adverse health impacts, particularly for lower income. If you adopt smart surfaces citywide, it drives large benefits. In the case of DC, more than 3-to-1 benefit cost ratio. Baltimore, same story. Lower income areas, much fewer trees, much darker, and can be as much as 14 degrees hotter in the summer. This structural inequality is an impediment to, it's a huge attribute of environmental injustice. This is true in London. It's true globally. It's certainly true in the United States. The way that increased heat in cities from these surfaces cascades through individual health, public health, and costs is large and complicated. This is from the annual review of public health, and it translates through into a whole variety of health and economic adverse costs, citywide, but concentrated in lower income areas. The least the cost of paying for electricity, particularly for air conditioning in the summer, much bigger than in low-income communities. For the modeling of, as one example of adoption of smart surface in Baltimore, if you move from dark roofs to reflective roofs, you capture some of that water and put it into a bioswale. You add a little bit of green roofs and solar PV. That transformation changes the city's albedo. It increases the reflectivity. That change in reflectivity plus increase in trees drives about a 3.3 degree average summer temperature change. In other words, over this period, while the world gets hotter, the city gets cooler. That's a good story for mayors. Job creation is an attractive feature. These are very job intensive things, having to plant trees or paint roofs. So the jobs piece of it is important. The net present value for a city of 650,000 like Baltimore is about $9 billion with a benefit cost ratio of about 10-to-1. So it's a financially very rational decision process. This is a summary of the measures of adoption of smart surfaces, these 10 measures down the left side. Each of them have a percentage area that they would cover over a 20-year period, cost, benefits, net present value. You can see in the benefit cost ratio, some of these things have a more than 10x financial return, and some of them are as little as 2. So the point is that cities can mix and match and make a decision given their objectives. Do they want to focus on climate? Do they want to focus on equity? Do they want to focus on jobs? Georges Benjamin, who's an MD and who runs the American Public Health Association, points out that smart surfaces are an important strategy to mitigate health risk from extreme heat in a very cost-effective way and should be broadly adopted and implemented. That's true globally. The coalition is led by a set of partners, including Ian Riley, who's the CEO of the World Cement Association, current big city mayors. 2 of our steering committee members ran, in one case, the International Finance Corporation, and the other is the Inter-American Development Bank. These are people who spend their lives trying to make cities healthier, and they view this as a strategy. It's a kind of a no-brainer strategy with very strong benefit cost ratios to move from a dark, lowest cost first design to smart surfaces that reflect heat and manage rain in a way to make cities far healthier. These are some of our partners. TERI is the largest NGO in India, for example. Many of these organizations work globally. And so the purpose here is to really become conscious about how we manage sun and rain, and to do so in a way that makes our cities more resilient, greener, reduces climate change, and reduces health burden. And then finally, here are some resources. The website on the Smart Surface Coalition has a lot of information about who we are, who our partners are. For an organization like the World Cement Association, I think there are 3 areas that are worth highlighting about how this strategy of smart surfaces addresses climate change. First is that when you increase the reflectivity of surfaces in cities, you're bouncing sunlight back into back into space. So instead of absorbing it and then heating up the city, what we call the urban heat island effect, which makes cities on average about 9 degrees warmer. You're instead bouncing a lot of that heat and light back into space. The second way you benefit in terms of climate impact avoidance is the ambient temperature reduction reduces the air conditioning load, which in most cities is dominant, and smart surface can reduce that by 15 to 25%. There's some additional sequestration in the form of trees, but an even more important part is that roads and built infrastructure represents our largest single available place to sequester carbon. So technologies from multiple companies are emerging to sequester CO2 into aggregate and into sand, which are the two largest components of concrete. And by sequestering CO2 into aggregate, into roads or buildings, highways, bridges, and infrastructure, you can actually make that carbon negative. So again, a bunch of ways that smart surfaces provides a pathway to carbon reduction, to climate change mitigation. And then, of course, on the adaptation side, smart surfaces allow cities to become a lot cooler, up to 5 to 10 degrees cooler Fahrenheit. So it's the single most important adaptation strategy we have for cities. And then again, on resources, there's a 3-part series in the industry-leading publication, Risk and Insurance, which walks through how adoption of smart surfaces protects city credit ratings from organizations like Standard & Poor's and Moody's to make sure that cities can continue to access bond markets. I very much recommend this 5-minute video on smart surfaces done by a woman who's the first PhD student in the world on smart surfaces. It's really, really terrific. And then contact the Smart Surfaces Coalition through myself or through Jack, and we'd be delighted to answer any questions you have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on World Cement Association's virtual open day. My name is Jenny Chu, and I'm head of energy productivity initiatives at the Climate Group. A little bit about the Climate Group. The Climate Group is an international NGO with a mission to drive climate action fast. Our goal is a world of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 with greater prosperity for all. We're headquartered in London, but we do have offices in Beijing, New York, and New Delhi. And our work is focused in systems with the highest emissions and where our networks have the greatest opportunity to drive change. We're also the Secretariat for the Under 2 Coalition, the largest network of states and regions globally committed to climate action. We also host Climate Week New York City every September, and annually we bring together voices from across business, government, and civil society to discuss and implement climate action now. So a little bit about our business action initiatives. Climate Group works with over 300 multinational businesses across every major sector and more than 220 state and regional governments around the world, representing over 1.3 billion people and 43% of the global economy. We focus on systems with the hardest to abate sectors, with the highest emissions, and where our networks have the greatest opportunity to drive change. Our initiatives include RE100, EP100, EV100, as well as now an increasingly focus on our work with the hard to abate sectors. We do this by building large and influential networks and holding organizations accountable, turning their commitments into action. So first, a little bit about EP100, our initiative looking at increasing global energy productivity. Right now, we can say we are the world's biggest club focusing on smarter energy use. We have 126 members making energy productivity improvements across the world. They represent over 11 sectors in 139 markets. You can see here that we have a variety of sectors that EP100 members come from. This includes the finance sector, technology, retail, and construction and property. Our other flagship campaign is called RE100. Here, the world's most influential companies are committing to sourcing 100% of their global electricity consumption from renewable sources. Right now, there's over 300 members committed to going 100% RE before 2050. In fact, around 70% of the members are committing to do this before 2030. And just like EP100, there's a variety of sectors making this commitment. And now onto our work with heavy industries. The climate group is increasingly focusing on heavy industries because this is where the greatest source of emissions currently occur. We worked in partnership with Mighty Earth to launch in February a global framework for decarbonizing heavy industry. This global framework is comprised of 6 principles that each represent a lever that policymakers can use to ensure the successful decarbonization of steel, cement, chemicals, and other heavy industries, and to ensure that this decarbonization happens on an accelerated pathway that is aligned to 1.5 degrees. It's the first time a set of publicly available global guidelines have provided clear steps for heavy industries. Our other initiative that joins the business actions is Steel Zero. Steel, of course, is the world's most widely used material and accounts for 7% of global CO2 emissions. Last December, we launched Steel Zero, and we now have 10 members dedicated to sourcing 100% net zero steel before 2050. Here in our platform, we're aggregating market demand for net zero steel by building a united group of leading organizations to support this transition. Inevitably, we're building a powerful demand signal to steel producers, investors, as well as policymakers. Members of Steel Zero are currently buyers of steel, specifiers of steel, such as designers and engineers, and others who are involved in the steel supply chain at any stage after the production of crude steel. On this slide, you can see the 10 members, which include renewable companies like Ørsted, property developers like Landsec, and others. We're very happy to have the opportunity to share our work today with World Cement Association members because we're getting ready to launch Concrete Zero. Concrete Zero is going to be similarly modeled after Steel Zero in the sense that, again, we are building out strong demand signals to influence markets and policies to enable the net zero transition for the concrete and cement industries. We will, again, following in Steel Zero's footsteps, initiate a buyers group aimed at setting this ambitious demand signal. And we're going to be working in collaboration with buyers, specifiers, and producers of concrete and cement. Now, we're getting ready to launch this, and we're hoping it will be before the end of this year. And currently, we are doing stakeholder mapping to ensure that we're talking to innovators and leaders in the cement and concrete industries who have committed to taking climate action and now are interested in making a specific commitment to source Concrete Zero before 2050. So I very much encourage you to get in touch with my colleague, Jen Carson at the Climate Group, who would be able to help any questions, answer any questions. Her email is jcarson@theclimategroup.org. Thank you very much again for this opportunity to speak with you today. Bye for now.